Hello, and welcome everyone. My name is Elena Chang, Director of ED&I Initiatives at TCG. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I'm thrilled to welcome you all to this virtual session, Accessing Federal Relief Funds, the BITOC edition. I am going to share a visual description with you right now. I am an Asian American woman with medium length dark brown hair, wearing glasses, a navy blazer over a black top, with a white wall and picture frames behind me. In this meeting, we're going to be focusing on the current federal relief funds, including the Shuttered Venues Operators Grants, formerly known as the Save Our Stages, the renewed Payroll Protection Program, and newly expanded Employee Retention Tax Credits. We're going to share some of our research on the successes and challenges BITOCs have been facing in accessing previous rounds of relief, hear updates and detailed information on the 3 upcoming opportunities from our lovely Director of Advocacy, Lori Baskin, and hear from BITOC leaders who will share their personal reflections on their experience with PPP and any advice that they may be willing to share. At the close of the session, we'll also have a more intimate extended Q&A period to further support in this process. Before we get started, we'll take a moment to offer our respects to the many lands on which we gather and honor the traditional stewards of these lands. If you have a land acknowledgement as part of your personal or organizational practice, we invite you to share them in the comments in the chat box now. While you do, I'll read the land acknowledgement posted in the TCG office. Theater Communications Group's offices are located on the Lenape Island of Mannahatta in Lenapehoking, the Lenape homeland. We honor the generations of stewardship the Lenape peoples have given to the water, air, and land. As guests, we pay respect to the Lenape peoples, past, present, and future, here in their homeland and throughout the Lenape diaspora. As you add your own land acknowledgements to the chat, wanted to quickly share the work that's already happened. On January 19th, TCG held a webinar focused on the relief opportunities that was available to everyone. And if you already haven't checked out the archived recording, we'll drop a link to the video in the chat right now so you could take a look at it in your own time. Today's video will also be recorded and we'll share the archive as well as the slides within a few days. In addition to the videos, you can access peer-to-peer support in the finance staff group on the TCG Circle. While this is not a BITOC or BIPOC affinity space on the Circle, there's already been a great deal of useful information shared in that group, and you can join it by emailing Corinna Schulenberg. She's dropping her email address in the chat right now. Also, TCG is committing to provide technical assistance with our lovely Andrea Nellis, TCG's interim CEO. As soon as SBA releases SVOG guidelines and applications, we will announce a schedule of sessions for BITOCs with Andrea in order to help folks make informed decisions and fill out the applications. These sessions will allow Andrea to meet with small groups of BITOC theaters to go line by line if needed, answer your questions and provide assistance. Now, it's my great pleasure to invite Jonathan McCrory, Artistic Director of National Black Theater, to the mic to share his perspectives on BITOC theaters and access to federal relief funding. I will note that we might have a special guest appearance by the illustrious Jackie Taylor, but in the meantime, I want to pass the mic to Jonathan.
Hi, everyone. Hello. So happy to be here. Really grateful to be able to share my own individual story and the institution's individual story with PPP when it was originally orchestrated, I think, in April. So I'm with the National Black Theater. I'm the Artistic Director of National Black Theater, co-leadership with both Sade Lifcott, who's the CEO of NBT, and myself. So as many of you all might have all been reeling from, and we all been trying to pivot from, around March 15th for New York City, what we were shut down. And in that shutdown, National Black Theater had basically trying to figure out, it was about $700,000 worth of revenue, basically evaporated overnight. And that was essential, as many of us know, and as many of us have been pivoting towards, to helping us to maintain our staff and be able to maintain kind of a sense of normalcy for our employees. So what then lo and behold, later down the month, around April or so, the federal government did this bailout program. And this the original bailout program was a little bit, I can say it was a horror show. It wasn't that enjoyable. It was a little bit of Hunger Games. It was a survival of the fittest, and it really created a mechanism that was a lot of mystique around. If you had to have good credit score, if the person applying had to have good credit score in order to actually be able to get the loan, which banks were actually doing it, who was doing it fast, who was doing it first, how to navigate it. I will say that MBT, really needing that money in order to maintain our staff and maintain our workflow, we approached it from multiple different aspects. We went through Citibank, and we also wanted to go, because they were saying go with smaller banks. They might be able to get the better loan, the loan through there faster. And we wanted to use this opportunity actually to invest in a Black bank. So we went with Carver Bank, which is in Harlem. It's a Black-owned bank in Harlem. And the process that Carver's application process, although we were trying to support a Black business, was way too intense. It was like extremely hard. It was like, I want this money, but I don't want my blood also. Like, you know what I mean? So that was a little too intense. Well, Citibank finally opened it up. And even though they did say someone with a good credit score had to apply, so that was the one mystique that was right with Citibank. We ended up going with Citibank. We got it through Citibank. Citibank was actually pretty smooth once we got past a lot of the kind of smoke and mirrors. I will say one thing that I will say as an advice. And maybe it's not so true now because it feels like it's a little bit more streamlined because now they've gotten some of the kinks out of the road. Find your person and hold on to your person that's inside of the bank to guide you through this process. To have an advocate inside of the system really helps to demystify a lot of the rigmarole around it. And a lot of the dotting the E's, dotting the I, crossing the T's. I always mess that up. It's my dyslexia. But it really helps you to really get to that point. So I would just say that's a key bit of advice that I would just lean forward. And we are applying for the new PPP loan. That's one of our game plans and strategies. Just because of just wanting to kind of get it done and also wanting to get the forgiveness done. Wanting just to kind of like settle all of that in one row. That's a choice that we're making. A lot of people are waiting for either Save Our Stages or for for the forgiveness program. But yeah, so that's my story. I think it is possible. It does take, and just know these are two individuals who are not savvy with government funding. I mean, not government, like federal funding and loan and application and rigmarole. Like ENEA has scared us 12 times. Like, you know what I mean? Like, is this too much? Like, I want to keep my hair, not lose it. So just know that these are two individuals who, like, it's not like we know how to whiz something like this with a snap of our fingers. I think it just takes tenacity. I think it just takes a commitment. And I think it takes finding your person, your human, to help you guide through this process. And if you have that, then I think that you can win. And I think it's already, the green light is already yours. That's my story. I'm sticking to it.
Thank you for sticking to your story, Jonathan. There are definitely some nuggets there, and I want to take a moment in a bit to lift up some of the amazing theaters that were able to access the previous round of funds. But before we get started, I also want to acknowledge the barriers, the very real barriers and discrimination that BIPOC-owned businesses faced last time around. We know that systemic racism and sexism have defined BIPOC-owned businesses, have denied them from equitable access to loans for a very long time, made it especially challenging for BIPOC women. And we've pulled some research from places including the New York Times, NBC, PBS, and the Black Enterprise. Feel free to take a look at this research in your own time, but I want to emphasize that, you know, yes, some of these dynamics played out during the first round of PPP. And if you believe you faced racism and sexism for these loans or in any dealings with your bank, the research says that you're not alone. However, some research that TCG conducted suggests that it's very much worth applying for upcoming opportunities, because during the last round of PPP, at least 45 BITOCs across the country were able to access support. And you can see some of them here. This does not reflect the entire list. So all to say, the barriers are real, but so is the success that many BITOCs have had in accessing support. You know, this is right now just an overview, a snapshot from the last round of PPP. If we could go to the next slide. A couple of data points here that may serve useful. The average amount that folks received was $76,388, and the median was $53,798. In tailoring today's session, we worked with Snehal Desai, Leslie Ishii, and Teresa Coleman-Wash to craft a BITOC inquiry form to receive initial questions on the upcoming opportunities. We received 27 responses, and interestingly enough, here are some of the items that had the most heat. You know, you'll again have a copy of these slides to take a look. Many of these questions will be addressed throughout today's session, but I wanted to lift two pieces in particular that are very much related to systems. How can we create more income security for BITOCs? This has been going on for so long. How to prove you need the money when you're operating with a volunteer staff and have a small annual budget to begin with. All of these programs, SVOG, PPP, ERTC, are meant to provide financial relief for lost income due to COVID. If there wasn't an expenditure because it was a volunteer activity, that is not really meant to be served by these forms of relief, unfortunately. I'm really hoping that at TCG, we can continue to find ways to speak to funders about establishing appropriate grants to help organizations that, you know, often rely on the support of their volunteers. Finally, I really want to give a special thanks to our internal TCG team that worked quickly with our BITOC leaders to help make today's session possible. Amelia Cachapiro, Director of Artistic and International Programs, ED&I Associate Sarah Machiko-Haber, Erica Ortiz and Anne of Marketing and Production, and Rachel Hip-Flores and Corinna Schulenberg for all of this very important BITOC research. Now, I'm happy to turn things over to my colleague, Lori Baskin, to share some key information about these opportunities. TCG's advocacy department has been working very hard to not only secure these major federal relief and recovery funds, but to ensure that past barriers to BITOCs can be addressed as much as possible in the current legislation. Lori?
Thanks, Elena. I appreciate all of the information you've shared, and Jonathan too. That was really good advice, and I'm going to be circling back to some of the stuff that has already been raised. So, Sarah, let's get started. Oh, I would like to introduce myself properly. Lori Baskin, I am Director of Advocacy at TCG. I've been here a long time. And in terms of my visual description, I am a white woman with shoulder length brown hair that's rapidly graying, especially this year. I am wearing a black top. I'm in my family room at my home near Peekskill, New York, which are the historical lands of the Lenape and Wappinger peoples. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm ready to get started. An overview. We are going to be talking today about 3 different buckets, 3 different programs through the federal government. Shuttered venue operator grants are formally known as Save Our Stages. There is no application yet, but it's coming soon, and I will come back to that. It cannot be paired with the Paycheck Protection Program. More on that in a bit. Paycheck Protection Program, we call it PPP. It is not a grant, it's a forgivable loan. So the paperwork and process is a little different. Round 2 opened January 11th or 13th or 19th, depending on, but it's open. Applications are open until March 31st. And again, in the reverse, it cannot be paired with shuttered venues. In other words, you have to choose, as Jonathan suggested, between PPP and SVOG. The other piece I'm going to cover today is called Employee Retention Tax Credits. It's one of those things that makes my eyes kind of spin in different directions because it's tax stuff and it's all really intense. But it's a refundable tax credit, and it's money that I think a lot of us hadn't been paying attention to, even us at TCG, and we're actually looking into it too. It could be a sort of surprising source of income at this time. It does pair with PPP. It did not originally. Last year, if you went for a PPP, you could not also go for an employee retention tax credit, but that changed with the law that was signed at the end of December. So now, retroactively, you can go for ERTC, even if you had a PPP last year. It is not yet clear whether that will be allowable with the shuttered venue operator grants or not. Let's go to the next slide, please. And another one. We're going to go right into, we used to call it Save Our Stages, but it's shuttered venues, SVOG. This bill authorizes the Small Business Administration to make grants to live venue operators, producers, promoters, or talent representatives to address the economic impacts of COVID on certain live venues. $2 billion is reserved for eligible applications with up to, organizations that have up to 50 full-time employees. So that may be of interest to a lot of you, that $2 billion out of a $15 billion program is set aside for small organizations. Eligibility is open to both for-profit and nonprofits, as well as movie theaters, some relevant museum operators, and talent representatives. TCG and the Performing Arts Alliance have urged SBA to offer specific public engagement, technical assistance, and awareness efforts for minority-led and underserved performing arts entities as SBA rolls out the Shuttered Venues program. They did that relatively late in the game with PPP. They did not offer that guidance last year. In fact, the first I saw of it was as they rolled out PPP 2. So we're hoping that they will do that sooner and specifically address your needs early on in the Shuttered Venues program. Next slide, please. Theaters are eligible to apply even if you do not own your performance space. As I said, this program is for both for-profits and nonprofits. Small Business Administration historically has served small businesses, commercial enterprises. So us nonprofits, we're sort of late to the game in terms of being a community that they serve. So I think they're getting up to speed. You certainly do not have to be a 501c3 to apply for SVOG. To qualify for this program, you will have to show a minimum 25% decline in gross earned revenue in one calendar quarter of 2020 compared to the same quarter in 2019. Not less than 70% of the earned revenue would be generated through cover charges or ticket sales. And we got this expanded from the original standalone bill to what appeared in law. Production fees or production reimbursements, that was an expansion. Nonprofit educational initiatives, another expansion, or the sale of event beverages, food, or merchandise. The bill was originally introduced to sort of serve the needs of a field that has been completely decimated, small commercial music venues. So it's an expansion again to bring in nonprofits, but that's why it was originally crafted that it would be ticket sales and like event beverages and food. So we got the production fees and educational expenses included there. Or, and that was such an important or that we advocated for in the bill, or as a principal business activity that you put your tickets on sale at least 60 days before the event. So if you can sell your tickets 60 days in advance, or you have been doing that, you're eligible. Next slide, please. The costs that the grant would cover are costs incurred from March 1st of 2020 through December 31st of 2021. So that's all, you know, from when we shut down last year through the end of this current calendar year. They do have a provision for supplemental grants for costs incurred from March 1st last year through June 30th, 2022. I don't know if there's going to be enough money for supplemental grants. I'm hoping we can all get in and you know, get the initial grant. Allowable expenses include payroll, including payments to independent contractors, rent, fixed costs like mortgage and debt payments, as well as other maintenance expenses, administrative costs, and so forth. To me, I think it's a little bit more flexible in that way than PPP. Let's go to the next slide, please. Applicants, this is the grant amount. Applicants would calculate your grant amount based on 45% of your gross earned revenue from 2019, and it's a cap of $10 million. Gross earned revenue from 2019 and 45% of that. I prepared this slide a couple days ago, and I might be proved wrong because SBA, and we'll post the link later on, not quite yet. They've posted some frequently asked questions. Big important point will be definitions. So they had not, as of yesterday, defined gross earned revenue or even revenue. For gross earned revenue, the Performing Arts Alliance advocated for total program service revenue, royalties, gross rents, gross sales of inventory, less returns and allowances. And we were basing our definitions off the Form 990. We defined earned revenue as the included items in gross earned revenue, less any expenses and costs that would be deducted directly on the Form 990. I'm not sure that SBA will indeed go this route. They have posted some information on their website, and I would say it's not done till it's done, and we may be encouraging them to make some changes or tweaks. Whatever they've posted is subject to change. It's not a done deal yet. And they've already made a change. They had publicized that certain periods of time were only open to entities with fewer than 50 employees. And then they backtracked on that within a week later. So stay tuned as all of this rolls out. Next slide, please. There are priority periods that exist in statute, in the law now. For this program, when it begins, when they post the application and say they're opening applications, the first 14 days, organizations that have suffered a revenue decline of 90% or more from April 1st through December 31st of 2020, compared to that same time period in 2019, would be eligible to apply. The second 14 days will be those organizations that had a revenue decline of 70% or more in that same time period. We expect that in this case, revenue will be defined as including both earned and contributed revenue. It's possible, therefore, that BITOCs and smaller organizations may find yourselves eligible during these priority periods. Relief funds that are accessed through the CARES Act will not count as revenue for this calculation. and seasonal organizations will use an alternate time period for the comparison. The important point on the priority periods, I think, is that we were successful in advocating that the agency, Small Business Administration, would be limited in how much money they could allocate during the 2 priority periods. No more, the statute says no more than 80% of the funds can be allocated during those 2 priority periods. This leaves, successfully, thank goodness, 20% of funds are reserved for after the conclusion of the priority periods. We think that this was really intended to, as I said earlier, be a program to serve and provide relief for commercial for-profit organizations. So this 20% set aside for after the priority periods will probably largely go to nonprofits. Next slide, please. So what do you need to do to prepare? We believe that SVOG will go through grants.gov. This is a grant program as opposed to PPP. We'll talk about it later, but that is a forgivable loan program. This is a grant program. So it'll probably go through grants.gov. You need a DUNS number. It's a data universal number system, your DUNS number, and it's the first step in registering as an applicant in grants.gov. You also need a SAMS number. It's a system for award management, and it's another required step in getting your organization ready to be able to apply for federal grants. As I understand it, a SAMS number has to be updated annually. Please do not wait until the application opens to embark on that process, because it takes a few days, as I understand it. I have never done it personally, but maybe you have. You want to make sure it's up to date and ready to go. We're not 100% sure, but my sense is that it's going to be a first come, first serve type of a program. And so if your organization does not fit into the first or second priority period, please don't wait. We're told that once the application opens, everybody can apply, and SBA will put the applications in the right time batches. They'll take care of that. You should apply right at the top. Next slide, please. I think that before I totally launch into the next program, the Paycheck Protection Program, I'm going to turn it back to Elena. We have some special guests.
Great, thank you, Lori. We'll go back to Lori in a second to hear more detail on PPP, but we want to take a moment to hear from Teresa Coleman-Wash, the founder and executive artistic director of the Bishop Arts Theater Center, and Rafael Sánchez, the executive artistic director of Repertorio Español, on their recent experiences with PPP. Teresa, we can start with you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I appreciate being here. My name is Teresa Coleman-Wash. As Alana said, I'm the executive artistic director and founder for Bishop Arts Theater Center in Dallas, Texas. We are on the land of the Caddo, Wichita, and Comanche peoples. I am a dark-skinned Black woman with natural hair. I am wearing a soft pink sweater with gold hoops. And I'm so happy to be here with you guys. So I know the folks at TCG know, but for the, just to give you some backstory, those of you who are on the Zoom call today, in 2005, we had the good fortune of having a 10,000 square foot building, dilapidated building, donated to our nonprofit. We raised about $500,000 in private sector funding at that time, and we were also able to get a construction loan for another $500,000. But several things were happening at that time. Theater audiences were declining. We knew that women of color who run nonprofits only receive 0.6% of philanthropic dollars. That's still true today. I think it may be 0.5% now. And the economy was plummeting. And so we have never followed the traditional nonprofit model because we knew we couldn't. We knew that that did not work for an organization of color. I will tell you that we were able to get a PPP loan in April of last year, but we, like Jonathan, we had to go through a very small bank. And subsequently what happened is we ended up moving all of our money. We were doing business with Frost Bank. They were non-responsive. They prioritized their large Eurocentric customers. And so when we were recommended to this smaller bank who was able to move our application through successfully, we started doing business with that bank, because the other thing that Jonathan alluded to is relationships are very important. And so, in my opinion, if a financial institution was not really to help us out during a time where we need it the most, then we probably should not have been, we probably should not have considered a relationship with that bank in the first place. So we changed banks. Prior to COVID, 77%, on average, about 77% of our total revenue came from earned income, because we knew that we had to prioritize the community. I mentioned that we never did anything the traditional way. We didn't have subscribers. We don't have subscribers. We have a jazz series. In addition to a theater series, we also have a speaker series. We have a robust arts education programs. And so instinctively, when COVID hit, our community really reached out to us in ways that were unimaginable. And so we were able to get the resources that we need because we had already cultivated really meaningful relationships, particularly with elected officials. And that's where I want to talk briefly about, more so than anything else. We are applying for the SVOG grant because we feel like it has more flexibility, and also we would be eligible for more funding, but also because we've cultivated a relationship with somebody at SBA. One of the things that the 2008 downturn taught us was to be small and nimble. And that has served us really well in this environment. But the other thing that I want to caution everybody on this call to really pay attention to, and that is the advocacy alerts from TCG. So when Lori sends out those TCG alerts, with one click of a button, I am connected to 3 or 4 of my elected officials. And when COVID happened, instinctively, Congresswoman Eddie Bernice Johnson and Representative Mark Veazey contacted me to say, are you okay? What can we do? So again, I think it's going to be incredibly important for the sector to really change paradigms in terms of where our funding is coming from. We are getting up to speed with SBA, as we should be, because we are small business owners. And so what I'm doing in this moment is I'm looking for unorthodox ways for us to receive funding. And certainly we should be eligible for this legislation. And I hope that we can continue the conversation to provide funding for nonprofits through more legislation like Save Our Stages and the Shuttered Venues Operating Grant.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Teresa. We do still have Rafael Sánchez. Hello, Rafael. We'd love to hear from you as well. And then we will get more of some deep dive here from Lori. Rafael?
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I really resonate a lot with the stories from Jonathan and Teresa. I think that we have been all in the same ship. My name is Rafael Sánchez. I'm the Executive Artistic Director at Repertorio Español, Spanish repertory theater company. My pronouns are he, him, his, él. And my visual description is a mid-30 years old Hispanic white man, bald, with a black beard that is turning gray very fast, and a black shirt. In my background, there is a white wall, a lamp, and part of my kitchen, a black mask hanging on the door, and maybe a husband walking around because, you know, we live in New York. So for those who do not know me or Repertorio, Repertorio is a nonprofit theater organization that has been performing the best of Latin American, Hispanic, Spanish, and Hispanic American theater with quality productions and bringing theater to a broad audience in New York City, including seniors, students, Hispanics of all national backgrounds for the last 52 years. And with more than 300 performances a year and 12 different productions running at the same time, as a real repertory, we are used to a lot of activity. But as all of you know, on March 13th, we closed our doors like the rest of New York theaters. And as for now, we don't have a date to reopen. I want to thank TCG for this, putting this together. I think it's very important, these kind of initiatives, to help us get a diverse and equitable theatrical community and share better the available resources under these challenging circumstances. You all know, we all know, I know Black Indigenous theaters of colors have been historically underfunded. And as not-profit leaders, I think that it's our responsibility to pursue these opportunities, as it is our governmental responsibility to pay attention to us. None of us knows exactly when this crisis will be over, but we all know for sure that our communities, our artists, our audiences have suffered the impact of the COVID crisis much more than anyone. And in our case, we're always thinking if Latinos and Afro-Latinos will have the discretionary funds to come back to the theater once we reopen. Will they feel safe? Will schools be allowed to have these educational field trips, or our teaching artists will be able to do their workshops in the schools all around the city? But nobody knows. But we know that the recovery will be hard. Like the rest probably of you, we lost 50% of our revenue, because basically our Repertorio's budget, 50% of our budget, of our revenue comes from box office. And we had to reimagine our artistic work with such a significant loss, transitioning into online cultural and educational programming and the whole structure of the company. And that is why once the crisis began, we quickly applied for the first round of PPP loans as quick as we could. And let's be honest, it was not easy. I think that we all have shared the same. There was not much information available at that time. I think it was April or March. Yeah, April or May. Banks were not sure about how to proceed or how to help us, or they were saying that the applications were not available yet. And it was very stressful, especially there were a lot of challenges to fulfill all these requirements with all the staff working from home, especially while covering our payrolls obligations to keep our staff working without being sure if we were asking for a loan that may not be forgiven. So it was challenging, but we made it, we got it, we spent it, obviously. And 2 days ago, we finally received a confirmation that our PPP loan was forgiven. Based on our size and expenses, that is $287,000, which is a significant amount of money to keep our team working, serving our communities and offering culture not only to New York City, but all over the world now. So even though I'm not an expert in finance, I need to admit that honestly, our financial manager was in charge of all this paperwork and all these documents. But I encourage everyone to analyze carefully which of the current opportunities fits better with your organization and apply. because we need this immediate help now, and we will need much more in the future. I forgot to tell that we made it through Citibank, and it was stressful because I think I remember it was a weekend. I remember that I think on Friday some other bank entities were already offering the PPP loan, and you know, we were waiting for Citibank to let us know when we could apply, but it's the bank that we have been using, and finally we made it through them.
That's so great. Thank you both so much. Teresa, I'm really grateful for your talking about the action alerts and advocacy updates that come from TCG, and that helped you in terms of establishing your relationships and cultivating your relationships with your elected officials, because boy, do we all know you cannot wait until the moment of a crisis to start talking to those folks. You're important to them. You are important to them, and they're important to you. So it's absolutely important to be cultivating those relationships all the time. But boy, advocacy works. There's this money, there are these options and opportunities now that wouldn't have happened if you all hadn't been contacting your elected officials. So thanks for sharing that, Teresa, and to both you and Rafael for sharing your experiences with navigating all of this complex stuff from last year. So thank you. I'm gonna continue on now and talk about a little bit more of a deep dive on PPP and the first and second draw. So there's almost $285 billion available for first draw if you've never gone for one, or second draw if you went for a forgivable loan last year. The application is open through March 31st, 2021. If you received a forgivable PPP loan from 2020, you do have to choose between, sorry, I think I need to rephrase that. If you received a PPP loan last year, you're good. You can apply for an SVOG. It's this year. You need to decide whether you're applying for a PPP2 or an SVOG. You cannot do both. Congress has set aside funds for new and smaller borrowers, for borrowers in low and moderate income communities, and for community and small lenders, which is really helpful. And I think you've heard an awful lot of experiences already on this call about which lender you go to, having a relationship with SBA and lenders is really important, or cultivating them, finding your human to talk to. But there's $15 billion across first and second draw PPP loans for lending by community financial institutions, which is really good. This information came to us in this guidance that kind of came late for what the federal government calls like minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, and so forth. 15 billion and 25 billion respectively for first and second draw PPP loans for borrowers with a maximum of 10 employees, or for loans smaller than 250,000. Yeah, I can't even see the bottom of the screen there. All right, Sarah, let's go to the next slide, please. The second draw, this is overview and qualifications. The cutoff is you have to have fewer than 300 employees. You have to have used all of your money from your first draw, if you had one, before you can receive second draw monies. You don't necessarily have to have put in for your forgiveness, but you do have to have used all the money from the first draw before the second draw. You would have to demonstrate a 25% reduction in gross receipts. Receipts is different terminology than in SVOG, where they talked about gross earned revenue and revenue. Gross receipts is different, and this would be in one calendar quarter compared to the same quarter in 2019. So for nonprofits, gross receipts are defined as under the terms in Form 990. Applicants may compare annual gross receipts in 2020 compared to 2019. Eligible entities, as I mentioned, are prohibited going for both. You have to choose a second PPP loan, forgivable loan, or a shuttered venue, SVOG. Even the act of applying, we are learning, the act of applying for a PPP is the disqualifier, not just receiving the funding. You can't even actually apply. We had hoped you'd be able to apply to both and then just accept one. That's not the way it works. If any of you has already applied because of the guidance, that early guidance for like minority-owned businesses, and you want, we've urged SBA to provide some sort of safe harbor or opportunity to withdraw that application if you would prefer to go for SVOG. So if you've done that and you wanted to change your mind based on information you're hearing, please let me know. We'll see what we can do to advocate for that. Next slide, please. Use of funds. Allowable expenses have been expanded from the first PPP to include software and other computing costs, moving expenses, PPE expenses, and other expenses required from complying with public health and safety guidelines from March 1st, 2020 on to the end of the National Emergency Declaration. The bill maintains the current requirement that 60% of costs be attributed to payroll in order to achieve full loan forgiveness. Next slide, please. The prior requirement that borrowers would deduct their economic injury disaster loan from their forgivable PPP loan amount has been repealed. If you got an EIDL loan, or was it a grant, but it was $10,000 and you had to take that off your PPP, that's no longer true. You can get both. Borrowers are eligible for loan forgiveness equal to the amount of allowable costs spent during a period of your choosing between 8 weeks and 24 weeks following the origination date of the loan. SBA will rapidly set in place a new streamlined loan forgiveness process for borrowers with small loans of under $150,000. That's really important. Boy, what an obstacle. I'm told that the process for forgiveness was also a nightmare. So I'm told with the new administration that is going to be streamlined. Next slide, please. So your loan calculation for PPP is whichever is less, 2.5 times your average monthly payroll costs or a cap of $2 million. You have a choice of 12 months prior to applying for the loan or 2020 or 2019 calendar years. And it's recommended that you run different versions of that calculation in order to determine the best one for you. Next slide, please. So for PPP, what do you need to do to prepare? Gather your financial information from 2020 and 2019. Review SBA guidance, and this is a hyperlink, and when you get these slides, you'll be able to link right through to the appropriate SBA page. Consult with your participating financial institution and your accountant or auditor. SBA will issue additional interim final rules and guidance as necessary. So we could expect more information to keep coming. If you use the same lender and payroll timeframe as your first draw and already submitted the required payroll documentation, there's no additional payroll documentation that would be required for your next application. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to talk about employee retention tax credits. The ERTC is a refundable tax credit against certain employment taxes. It was established under the CARES Act and encourages businesses to keep employees on your payroll. This is again a hyperlink to the IRS page for updates, and they do provide updates. We are awaiting further Treasury guidance. Let's go to the next slide, please. So an overview of ERTC. you can access both the employee retention tax credits and PPP as long as they're not used for the same wages in the same time period. So you'll need to do a spreadsheet and which employees are covered during which time period by ERTC versus PPP. And as long as it's not the same wages, you're okay. And it's retroactively available for qualifying wages from 2020. It's been extended through July 1st, 2021, and significantly expanded, raising the credit from 50% to 70% of qualified wages. For 2020, it was 50% of up to $10,000 in wages per year per employee. And you have to have been like operating under a full or partial suspension, like government dictated suspension, or a 50% gross receipts decline. In 2021, the parameters changed. It's up to 70% of $10,000, up to $10,000 in wages per quarter per employee. Again, you'd be operating under a sort of government mandated full or partial suspension, or only a 20% gross receipts decline. So it's definitely more favorable. Let's see the next slide, please. Okay, this is where I want to talk overall. You've heard about shuttered venues, SVOG. You've heard about PPP and employee retention tax credits. What do you do? How do you make a decision about what's best for your organization? You're going to calculate the most advantageous option. You're going to evaluate your payroll, calculate all your sources of earned revenue. For SVOG, your grant amount is based on 45% of your gross earned revenue from 2019. For PPP, it's 2.5 times your average monthly payroll costs, up to $2 million for the second draw. It's really an individual decision, organization by organization, and doing that math. If you've already applied for a PPP second draw, that may be your determining factor, though we'll see if they'll make institute any sort of a waiver system. The question is, can you afford to wait a little bit longer? SVOG applications aren't out yet, but they posted some frequently asked questions guidance today. In a moment when we stop screen sharing, I'm going to ask Corinna to drop that link into the chat so that you can see some more information than I've been able to incorporate into this presentation because it just came out. PPP applications don't close until March 31st. So here we are, it's January 28th. You have a little bit of time. I believe we're going to see SVOG applications in the next week or two. They are moving quickly. My advocacy team actually has an appointment to talk with the SBA administrators of this program tomorrow morning at 8:30 a.m. Eastern time. So we'll be advocating for some of this stuff. I know that we have another guest speaker who has joined us. I'm going to turn it back to Elena for just a moment. And I think after we do all of that, we would be, I can't remember our slides, but I think we'll be going to Q&A after that. But first, Elena, to you.
Great. Thanks again, Lori, Jonathan, Rafael, and Teresa for everything you shared. It's so valuable to hear from folks today and see fellow BITOCs reflected in this experience. I also see that Jackie Taylor of Black Ensemble Theater has just joined us. Jackie, hello.
Hi.
So,
Sorry.
no worries, no worries. We have you here. Would you like to share a few sound bites on your experience with PPP and any recommendation you might have for our other theaters of color to apply?
For us, the PPP was at first a difficult process. It was a little frustrating working with the bank and trying to figure out what we needed to do. But we did have strong help from the bank And they really took care in guiding the process. So that first PPP, I think we all kind of were wondering, what is this about? Tanetta, are you there? Tanetta is my COO, and she really led that process.
Hi.
So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think to Jackie's point, we all, when the CARES Act in general, there were lots of questions about who qualified for what, if you could count 1099 employees. When it first came out, there was some misinformation. And because we were trying to pounce on everything so quickly, we submitted everything to the bank, when there was still confusion over 1099. Once that was cleared up, it was, I would say, a fairly easy process. And we really did have great banking partners with BMO Harris. And, the one thing that we did do, and I'm not sure if other people, other organizations did this as well, we switched our payroll to BMO Harris. So it just made it a lot easier. We already had an account with BMO Harris, but not our payroll account was with a different bank. But we switched it. So it's going to be very easy for them to calculate and to know and forgive that, because payroll came, was straight from BMO Harris. So that was one thing I thought was really smart. And I think it's something that they recommended. And again, like Jackie said, great partners. We logged in really right around SVO. And that question was answered for us, because we're like, okay, the timing is just not great. And it's not enough stress out there as to what we should do. So let's have us wonder if we should do PPP or SVO. I don't know. So we are waiting. As Lori said, we're just waiting, but our bank again told us that, for the PPP right now, they're not getting as many applications. There are a few other restrictions, and the bank kind of guided us through and just said, don't worry about it right now. Just you have until March 31st. And they recommended that, based on the calculations, back of the envelope calculations, that, yeah, we should really just wait and do the SVO, because the difference is, for us, is substantial. So, but yeah, so it's I feel like we're blessed. People are doing the best they can. And we are much better prepared this second round for PPP. And like you guys are hopefully just awaiting SVO. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tanetta and Jackie. So great that you were able to join us. Friends, we are going to open it up since we do have some time for individual questions for Lori, as well as for any of the other BITOC leaders who've shared remarks. What I've been hearing through and through with the representatives from the 4 BITOCs so far is essentially it's frustrating, but don't be scared. Emphasis on relationships, banking partners, and there's plenty of other things that Lori can respond in further detail about. So let's just take a moment here. We encourage you to switch to gallery mode if you're willing and able. It's just our small group here. You can find that in the top right corner of your screen by clicking View Gallery Mode. And yeah, if you have a question, you can either raise your hand through, yeah, I see you here. Is it Tom Ye? You're on mute.
Okay, good. No, Tommy. The O is wrong.
Yeah, if you could share your name, your pronouns, and what organization you're representing.
My name is Tommy Myrick, and I am the founding director of Voices in the Dark Repertorio Theater Company, which is located here in New Orleans, Louisiana. She and her and hers, okay? And mine. Anyway, so here's my question. Okay, Voices is in its 29th year. We have never had a home. But at the same, I'm talking about a home base, but at the same time, we have performed and produced at every major theater structure here in New Orleans over those 29 years. And I think one of the reasons why we have, well, first of all, this is the Deep South. Secondly, this is the Deep South. And thirdly, this is the Deep South of New Orleans. And so with that comes a whole lot of everything, especially with a Black female lesbian in charge. And so in as much as I've had funding over the course of these 29 years from various major companies, none of the major companies have done major funding, if that makes any sense. Okay, but they always want to make sure that they're boom there. So so we really don't have and haven't had any employees except for me and my stage manager, who is also my assistant over these past 29 years. We have never missed a season of productions, 3 to 4 productions a year, and we've always had sellouts. So I'm not sure which of these, if any, could possibly help us. I think probably the main reason we haven't had any major funding, even though we've had major companies, is because of the fact that we have no home, if that makes any sense at all. So we sort of like in between a brick and a hard place, yet and all, we are probably, if you did your research, one of the most respected theater companies in this city. Though we're the only theater company without a home, really. So there you go. So what's my question? Which of these, if any, do we qualify for? There we go.
Yeah, I think that since it sounds like your payroll is kind of on the smaller side, that payroll protection program is not the one. If you charge money for tickets and they're not free, regardless of what's that you're selling out, you say, you've had earned income. The grants actually don't play into the size of your relief grant from SVOG. It's really the loss of that earned revenue. And that's, I assume you haven't been able to during the shutdown. And, I don't know what the rules are. They vary in different parts of the country. But if you're not selling tickets right now and your income's down, you're going to be eligible for SVOG, I would think. And probably if that's the economic impact on your organization, because other than your salary and I think you said a stage manager.
Yeah, who is part-time volunteer.
Yeah, so it's going to be more about your tickets and the loss in earned revenue, earned income. And so I think SVOG is probably the way to go. I want to make sure to mention that in addition to this session that we're doing today, and we're doing a similar one with a different group of folks tomorrow, we are going to, I might be stealing Elena's thunder, but we're going to be providing technical assistance with our interim chief financial officer, Andrea Nellis, who's going to wave because she's here on the call. There, Andrea. And she could actually, in her sessions, go through various line by line and applications and help you make those determinations based on your actual budgets, which we can't really do today. Right. But that would be my sense, is you're looking at a loss of earned revenue from your ticket sales. We will come back to the technical assistance sessions with Andrea before we close out today. We'll tell you more.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Are there more questions?
Yes, I see Sheila.
Hi, I'm Sheila K. Davis. I am She, Hers, a new professional theater in New York City. And as a very small micro organization, I must say we had absolutely no problem getting the first round. I don't know if it was the first round, but it came in July. And I've been with Chase Bank all of this time. It was really no problem. My question is, our programs where we lost money were in education, so that was not earned revenue. But we lost a grant once schools closed down. So do we qualify to apply for the SVOG without having ticket sales or earned revenue?
That's interesting because the loss, it depends on how that money comes in for your education programs, which is certainly could be earned revenue, but if it was totally grant driven, then I guess it's grant driven. So yeah, they are looking to replace loss of earned revenue. The government, and we argued this, we advocated, I can't tell you how hard for months with elected officials, and also honestly talking to the Broadway League and the National Independent Venue Association, NIVA, that the grant amounts should be based in total revenue loss, not just earned income loss, because our business model is different in the nonprofit sector, and it should reflect all of that. The pushback that we got was that they didn't want the government to be replacing contributed revenue. They felt that was already private money, and so private money should replace loss in private money, and the government was going to try and step in and help small businesses with a loss of earned revenue due to shutdowns that were government imposed, you know. So maybe on the workshops with Andrea, she can help determine whether any of that education money that you're talking about having lost, whether it could be considered earned, or if it's just, if it's contributed, and what else might count on your books as earned revenue loss.
Okay, all right, thank you very much.
We have a couple minutes left. I want to make sure we get through at least 3 more questions. I want to lift some questions from the chat. We'll start with Rachel. I am a new theater film production company who also does not have a home. I started productions through a neighboring theater in Ohio. I am also operating with only myself, my stage, set manager, and part-time HR consultant. Rachel, did you want to share a question?
Basically, the lady that just talked, I kind of wanted to ask the same question, if my business also would qualify for loss of revenue, because during our production 2020, right in the midst of the rehearsing, we had to switch from a stage production to a filmed stage production, which meant we had to complete the rehearsal through Zoom web, and we did the actual filming at local public access channel for our city. So it's on a DVD, and that's the only means that we have to like earn any kind of revenue from this, you know, production. So we lost a lot, but we put our heart in it. We went into our own personal accounts to complete and all of that. So my question is, will my company qualify for the, you know, SVOD as well?
Yeah. Thank you, Rachel.
Yeah, I think that you're talking about a loss of ticket revenue.
Yes.
You can't really charge the same amount for a video that you could for a live theater experience. And I think you're in very good company. So many folks are in the same. So, but yeah, I think that you're talking about a loss of ticket revenue. To everybody here that says, forgive me if I'm mispronouncing, is it Tomi? Okay, you also said I did it wrong. Tomi, sorry.
Tomi, yes.
Thank you. You also said you perform at lots of different venues. You don't have your own space.
Right.
And same with Rachel, and maybe many of you, and that's okay. You do not have to own your own space. You do not have to perform in the same space to be eligible for SVOG. But you want to be in a situation where it's still the ticket revenue, the box office ticket revenue at whatever space, wherever you're performing, would normally come to you, not a presenter where they're paying you a fee, right? Well, maybe that would be a production fee, even so, that would be earned revenue too, but it's loss of ticket sales. So you would add up the loss of ticket sales from all the different spaces where you perform, and that's your loss of earned revenue. I don't know if maybe Andrea wanted to clarify that.
Comment that the grant amount is based on your 2019 earned revenue figure. So it's not what you're losing in 2020.
Thank you.
Based on the 2000, so you would take your calendar year 2019 earned revenue and it's 45%. And they're not parsing out what parts of earned revenue, it's just earned revenue. So I don't think it matters if you've done a streaming this year versus something, because it's not about this year, it's about going back.
Thank you, appreciate the clarity, that's right.
Thank you, Andrea, for chiming in on that.
No problem.
I want to take maybe 2 or 3 more questions here. I have another question from Emilio from the chat. Is there somebody else that I could line up for after Emilio? You can raise your hand or indicate your question in the chat. Emilio, this is the question that you offered. Are there funding sources for BIPOC theaters that may not be at a deficit, but have been leaders in creating work for artists through the pandemic to continue that work?
I think the answer is the same one that Andrea just gave. Whatever was your earned revenue from 2019, you would calculate 45% of it.
But you do need to have a decline in revenue. So you need to prove that you've had a decline in revenue for 1 quarter of 20 compared to 1 quarter of 19.
Right.
Does that answer your question, Emilio? Was there something specific to the pandemic that you wanted to share? Was there anything else?
Well, something else came up when the question was being asked about like ticket sales and earned revenue versus being commissioned to do work. Because I just wanted to bring up, I don't know if anyone else is going through this similar experience, but a lot of our at least in where I am in Michigan, a lot of the theater companies that work with BIPOC artists or for BIPOC communities, we often do work for free, or it's not charging our audience. So I feel like this model is I guess I'm learning today about what the grants are valuing in this model, but I was just curious if anyone is familiar with maybe grants or sources that really value people doing work in communities that might not be in traditional theater spaces and might not be for traditional theater going audiences as revenue sources as well. I don't know if anyone had any insight on that.
Can I just lift up one other thing on the PPP? That people should also make sure that they've applied as individuals, because if you're getting paid as a 1099, you can apply and get a PPP based on that. So it might be another avenue to look at.
Great, thank you, Andrea. Emilio, where are you based?
Detroit.
Detroit, okay. Do folks want to chime in to comment on what Emilio has shared? I mean, I'm making a note of this, Emilio, so I could follow up with you directly on, some organizations that may not be arts related or tied to the government that may, there's so many BITOCs that are really stepping up for their communities during the pandemic by creating really meaningful works that lift up, the communities. And yeah, I'll follow up with you directly on that.
So I have a question for Emilio. Do you get paid? Do you pay yourself a salary for anything, for any of the performances, Emilio?
I don't pay myself personally unless I'm directing or writing on the project.
Okay. Do you pay the other performers, or is everybody, okay, you do? And yep. You have that documented, is that right?
Yes.
Well, it appears that he would be eligible for the PPP too.
Yes, I think that's right, Teresa. I think you're right. Emilio, I mean, we can look for funding sources, as Elena said, that respond to your question specifically about creating work for particular communities. But just in general, you know, the PPP and the SVOG aren't specifically for BITOC theaters, but you might be eligible. So I would say when we're able to, you know, when we know that the PPP applications, I'm sorry, the SVOG applications and guidelines are posted, that is when we will set up times with Andrea and bring your numbers and ask for those questions. And I think that Teresa Coleman-Wash is correct that you would probably be eligible for the PPP too.
I have one more question, if I may ask.
Yeah.
In 2019, Voices did 3 major productions. We did Raisin in the Sun because it's 60th anniversary. We also did Le Code Noir, which is a historical outdoor drama that I wrote about the history of Louisiana. And we did Transcript, which is about transgender individuals. We paid everybody. And we were able to pay everybody because we had grants. Would that grants that help us pay everybody in 2019, would that be, and we also had 4 productions scheduled for 2020. Would that be revenue loss? Would that be a part of what we would do for the SVOG? Because not only did we pay people, but people had to pay to see it too. So it's earned income. So it's
yeah, paying people is the payroll part of it. The ticket income is the lost in earned revenue. You have to the SVOG, you're going to have to show a minimum 25% decline in that gross earned revenue in 1 quarter of 2020 compared to 2019, right? And then I'm scrolling back through to look at what the requirement was for PPP. It was a 25% reduction in gross receipts in 1 calendar quarter compared to the same calendar quarter from 2019. So there's eligibility. And then in terms of the amounts, Andrea, maybe you can answer. I mean, if they used grants to pay people, that's payroll.
It's as long as it was on payroll, because a lot of people are paid on 1099. So 1099 would not count for the PPP. But the PPP is, the amount of the PPP is based on 2.5 times your average monthly payroll for 2019. There's other different things. You could look at on 20. But that's what it, so it wouldn't matter where for the PPP, it wouldn't matter where your funding source came from. It would just be on a calculation based on your payroll.
Right.
And then for the SVOG, it would matter. Your grants would not be included because that is a contribution and not earned revenue.
Right. So I think that's a really excellent model for run the numbers for both and see which one works out better.
Okay.
I want to be mindful of time. We have your registration information. There's also Lori's email information at the end of the slide deck. I imagine there'll be additional questions. A couple of items here. A reminder that this is just the beginning of the ways in which we're hoping to support you in accessing these opportunities. If you'd like to join the Finance Staff Circle for additional peer-to-peer support, please email Corinna. Her email is going to be in the chat momentarily, cschulenberg@tcg.org. We will share the archive video with additional resources in the next few days. Teresa Coleman-Wash earlier mentioned, I'm making sure everyone gets their money. Thank you for that. Once again, as soon as SBA releases SVOG guidelines and applications, we will also announce a schedule of BITOC technical assistance sessions, more time with Andrea. These sessions will allow Andrea to meet in smaller groups, to go line by line if needed, answer questions and provide additional support. Until then, Thank you all to our speakers today, especially Jackie, Jonathan, Rafael, and Teresa from our BITOCs for joining us. Feel free to throw them some love in the chat. Thank you again to Lori Baskin and Andrea Nellis and TCG staff who managed this webinar. We shall be in touch soon. And I hope that you are all a bit more encouraged to apply to any of those relief opportunities.
How do we get in contact with anybody else who's on the Zoom today, if we wanted to?
Well, I mean, that's a great question. I mean, let me see here. I don't see everybody's faces. What I can do is, let's do this. We have the email information of everyone here on the back end. If you do not feel comfortable with your email address being shared with the group, please email me directly by, let's say, 8 p.m. Eastern time today. So if you do not want your email to be shared, please email me. My email address is echang@tcg.org. And anyone that does not respond, I will follow up with all of the attendees today with the list of folks who participated in their organizations. Okay?
Thank you very much. Yes.
All right.
Okay.
All right. Any other final words folks want to share? We're good. Rafael, Teresa, Lori, Andrea? Okay.
Thanks everyone for joining us today and good luck.